of this that way I can
Sure.
smile. Love it. All right.
Awesome. We are live. Welcome to a podcast with your host, Stephen Maxted here. And today we have an incredible guest. We just chatted a minute before, and nothing has really changed except she got more awesome since the last time I think we chatted about like 10 years ago in Ag together. We have Shanleigh Thomson here, or maybe last name's changed now, but Shanleigh with Shan Ferments. We'll stick with that. And she is a brewmaster extraordinaire. Well, I'll get you to better describe this, but basically you're working in breweries and you're doing stuff, and it's always been very interesting to me to see you follow part of the journey here, and I felt it need be a catch up as we caught
Yeah.
up a little bit before here. But and before we do that though, as I said right before, well, what kind of beers do we have today? And
Well,
thanks for joining us, because I picked up a couple locals. This one's kind of new for me, but
no, this one foamed right over. Just
I was fearing that.
everywhere. I was not expected.
No, that's okay. So
I got.
well, I'll start.
We're okay.
I'll start with mine here. I got a classic
Start with
1919 by Little Brown Jug, and then I picked up this one, Time Trap IPA from Namesake, and we just looked them up before because I'd never actually seen it before. I'm going to start off with the Namesake because this one looks fun to me, and you'll be able to tell me more about what's actually in these beers. But I've gone to a couple little things. Anyways, Jen, tell a little bit about yourself and your beer.
Sure, yeah. I have from Balmer Brewing and Ace Brewing, so it's a collaboration called Jet Lag, which is hilarious. Balmer Brewing, I picked this up. I'm good friends with the previous brewmaster and the previous owners. They're actually all from, except for Cam. Cam's from Vancouver, but Blair, who was the previous head brewer, is from Regina. So when I walked in there the first time I was in Vancouver, they're like, "No way. We're prairie people too," which, honest to God, has gotten me more connections in this industry than probably anything else. Is like, hey, we all escaped the Midwest and the prairies. So Blair's still an amazing head brewer. He's out in Kelso, which is the middle of nowhere in BC, but his brewery lives on. So 1919 is awesome. Love the guys over at Little Brown Jug. Jeremy is a wizard. He is the head brewer, owner, manager. I'm not really sure what his title is, but I love Little Brown Jug. They've always been so hospitable to me. But yeah, I love the Winnipeg breweries as I like clean up this giant mess I made. But
it's so funny because I had that fear, because I'm like, I just want to pick these up real quick before jumping on here. I'm like, oh, they might be shaken up, and then that happened to you. It's like I accidentally manifested that through the screen. But
oh my God, that was podcasts are like that. That's why they're live. It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
No, so I've been since we've talked, I mean, shit, that was like a long time ago. I've been in the alcohol industry. Do you want me to talk about, like, I came from food science, so
yeah, let's do it. Let's do that, because I was thinking in my head, I was like, yeah, let's do that. We took an egg degree together. I was more egg biz. You were taking food science, and walk us through that. How did you get to where you are today? I think that's super interesting.
I think, the thing about food science is that everyone from food science typically goes into manufacturing or quality control, like microbial stuff, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, that's boring. So alcohol, I like to party. I wanted free. Come on.
I love that. Oh my God.
I did my master's at Purdue in Indiana, which incredible place. If anyone hasn't been, Indiana is like a flyover state, but the nicest people and the cheapest everything. I swear to God, they had quarter beer nights on Mondays at some of those places. Quarter beer nights. I know, it got me.
I hear about the good old days. Remember when I think there used to be a bar we used to have that here in Canada. Then unfortunately there was a big accident or whatever, from my understanding. But like someone lost their life, and then they changed all the drinking rules. But on the economy side of things, it would have been nicer in the pocket. So
yeah, no, it was insane. I love Indiana, would not move back there, but still has a place in my heart. And from there, I went to Diageo, which owns all the liquor. It's a number company for Smirnoff, Captain Morgan, Kettle One, Crown Royal, and a million other things. So like Tanqueray, I'm trying to think of Gordon's Gin. Anyways,
a
Rooms.
lot.
Yeah.
It's like a big map. Like when you pull up their stuff, I know I've seen it. And like oddly enough, shout out to my grandpa. He passed away about a year ago, but he used to be a rep for I guess whatever they were called before Diageo. There was like a name before they like took over and stuff.
Yeah.
And he repped like hard liquor. Like he was like the Smirnoff, like introduced like Smirnoff and Crown to like Manitoba,
Amazing.
like back in the day. Yeah, I just thought of that when you're talking about. I should do a little shout out. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yep,
and I
Gary
mean the
Max.
products are killer. Yeah, I mean that in and of itself, like the breadth of products that they produce is just insane. So I was put on am I liquid commercialization specialist? That was my official title. But basically it was to take a formulation that someone far more creative than I was in the marketing team basically would give me a formulation and say, now this is like made at a, a small scale. I need you to blow it up to 2 million gallons and make it taste the same. So basically that was my job. Yeah.
Okay. How often did that work? From like samples, it works like a lot of time. Okay. Well, because I'm thinking like the other side of like my egg brand. I know when I worked in like the chem side, a lot of like the smaller sample stuff that we did worked good on like small trials, but then make it bigger, like kill most of the field, like or whatever. Like something would go wrong, it just like wouldn't work or whatever. So I was just wondering, okay, let's get that it was successful.
No, you had to make it work. Like
right.
You really didn't have a choice to not make it work. And I mean, like I was 24. Like think about it. I'm a young kid, right? 24. Yeah. And they're giving me like purchasing power of like, oh, you've got $2 million to buy this much flavoring. And I'm like,
holy shit.
What? Like we're talking budgets. And like you have a month and a half to reformulate it because they wanted it on the shelf. So you'd have like a month and a half to get it on the shelf. And then they were like, if it doesn't work, we just won't make it anymore. That was their whole strategy. Huh. Like it was crazy. I loved working there and it was absolutely insane because everyone was under the age of 30 at the tech center. Right. So it was just insane. And they gave you so much free stuff, all the samples you wanted.
We got to know what the product tastes like.
Drink responsibly, yep. the key. And it's like, what are you trying to do? Like what? So from there, I was like, I can't deal with corporate liquor because like, honestly, it is still ladder climbing and corporate BS. Right. And I just couldn't handle it. So I took a year off to travel. We kind of talked about that. You took a year to travel and got stuck in a pandemic. This was 2015 to 2016. I booked a one-way to Fiji and I'm like, fuck it, I'll just go.
So cool.
Yeah. And I traveled all around the world and that was amazing. And then came back to Winnipeg for a few months to work in Manitoba's Liquors and Lotteries was kind of what I was just doing. And then like promo work on the side in liquor stores, like, do you want a sample of Crown Royal?
Yeah.
So I did that. And then went, because I was waiting to go to brew school at Davis because there was a 2-year wait list.
So cool.
And I did that and that was hilarious. Like I learned so much, but also like, think about it. Now you've got this professional program and it was 8 months. It was intense. Like you're back at school, you're 9 to 5, like very intensive program. But everyone at that point was over the age of 30 or like late 20s, early 30s. There's people from the military using their GI Bills. So one of my best friends, Colonel Bob, was one of the missile program directors for the US Army. Like the man, hilarious. I text him because I still love him and I talk to him. I'm like, hey, I'm going to be in California. He has a house in California with his brother. I'm like, are you going to be there this week? And he goes, no. And I can just hear him because he dictates on his phone. No, Shanleigh, period. I'm going to see my cousin's inauguration, period. We'll catch up next time, period. I can just hear him. I'm like, whatever, inauguration, whatever. And then I'm like, who's getting inaugurated where? I go onto his Facebook. It's Kevin McCarthy is his cousin, the Speaker of the House for the US. I'm like,
it's like a different level of, yeah.
I'm like, what? So like, there's pictures of Bob, my friend from Brew School, and like, like he's in his 60s, and it's like, congratulations, cousin Kevin. And I'm like, no, no, it's not cousin Kevin. Like, what? So, no, brew school was a dream. And then I worked for minimum wage at multiple breweries in Seattle. And then I got back to Canada and I sold brewing ingredients for one of the largest brewing ingredients companies in the world. That was a couple of years, again, a lot of corporate stuff. And most recently, I worked for basically I represented farmers in the Pacific Northwest and sold hops on their behalf. So
they were hop farmers.
Yeah. So basically
Super cool.
It's like a co-op that I worked for. And it was only for like my territory is Western Canada. So essentially Winnipeg West and everything north. And yeah, so I worked for them and
cool.
Didn't end well.
It happens. I don't know the circumstances if you're going to chat about it, but I don't know. I've been there. There's been
like me, and that's it. So happens. Fine, whatever. So that's cool. But I've been disliked before. I'll be disliked again, and that's okay. Western Canadians don't always get along with Eastern Canadians, and that's okay. So, anyways. Yeah, Western Canada's a different place.
I was looking forward to this all week. I mean, I had a great week of recording and meetings and networking and stuff, but this is just like hit a whole new level. It got better as the week was going. It was just everything was taking off, and this is not. We're like 11 minutes in here now that we're keeping track. This is awesome though.
Yeah, he didn't like me, and I'm like, cool. So now I'm just doing my own thing. I love education. I love teaching people about beer and brewing, and that's kind of where my stick is right now. So we'll see.
What are you doing right now? So that happens, and then now you're filling that gap for the listener here. What's going on now?
So I've been on Instagram now for a few years during all of this, basically talking about products that I'm selling, beers that have the products in them, kind of going through more of an educational approach to it. And so now I've basically expanded that to a website. Consultation services, of course. But, basically what I'm hoping for is to create a platform where I can provide education on the stuff that really isn't talked about in brew school or in the industry at all, which is, of course, supply side. It's like anything. You're basically creating contracts for brewers to be able to afford these products. And because they're agricultural products, you only have a certain amount every year. And they can't just be stored and held for years on years and years, and you can't just backload them. So,
hold on, Shan. Are you telling me that eggs don't come from Sobeys?
Yeah,
they come from yeah.
Yeah, I know. So basically, I want to be able to help those who don't really know what's going on that side, and I also kind of want to talk about the mental health aspect of it, because the brewing industry has never really discussed that aspect. We had kind of a reckoning a few years ago about, the kind of a Me Too movement sort of thing in the beer industry. But it's still there. It's just, we don't talk about the mental health aspect. A lot of these people, a lot of the brewers are working 18 hours a day. The beer goes wrong. You've got a triple batch. It does take a toll. And especially a lot of the owners who've never brewed before don't really understand what's going on, and a lot of these places don't have HR. So I'm out there for awareness as well.
I mean, well, I'm just going to throw this out there, but either way, HR works for the company, not for the employee.
Don't I know that?
I think that's a misconception right there. That's going to be mark the time here, folks, because that's a whole other topic. But wait, one thing I have to share this story. I wrote it down literally because I was like, I need to jump in here at some point.
Yeah.
Because this is just so funny. And you might even know some of these people, but this is several years ago. I was actually in Australia for a wedding, went to this brewery there called, don't worry, it comes back to Canada.
Yeah.
I think the brewery I wrote down here, I think the name is Three Pines. And they had, if it's Three Pines, good. If not, then it's something close to that, something pine. And they had a banana beer or banana ale there that I had. And I was like, oh, this is the weirdest thing ever. But it was fun. And the weird thing was I came back to Canada from that trip and then ended up in Calgary. I had some friends, or maybe the company I was even working with at the time. I was out there and I went to this other brewery called Tool Shed. And this guy's giving this tour, and he's telling me about this, and it's like a pretty extensive. I remember it being like a pretty big like warehouse we were in, and he's telling this story, and he's like, "Oh yeah, my brother actually has a brewery, and it's in Australia. It's called Three Pines or whatever."
No way.
Yeah, and I was literally like, I was like, "Holy shit!" I was like, I was just there like 3 weeks ago, man. I was like, there's a picture of me having his beer.
God.
I like interrupted the tour. I'm like, I was just there, and it's just like there's like 20 people in this like brewery bus. I loved going to like doing those kind of tours on travel.
Yeah.
I dragged some friends to go do that, and yeah, and then well, he had an interesting story on his own. He literally started this thing in his backyard out of a tool shed.
Yeah,
and that's why it's called Tool Shed. And but yeah, then him and his brother halfway across the world, and they're both running breweries, and I just happened to be within a month of seeing both of them. And it was just my question kind of thing stemming from that though is just like how small is, like you mentioned, there's kind of like a movement or whatever, like how small is like the brewing community once you're in it? Is it like, does everyone kind of know is it like going to like, is it like working an ag, like 1 degree of like you worked with one person, they're related to somebody else kind of energy, or what's that like?
Kind of, not quite as close as ag, because that's insane. That's like incestuous, but no, it's the brewing industry is geographical, I'd say. So Western Canada for sure is a lot more like they know each other fairly well. I would say it's not like that well connected, depending on again, geography is a big one, and then kind of like what stage are you in, right? So like influencers are well known, breweries can be well known if they're hype enough, right? So there are certain breweries, but the brewers themselves aren't really well connected unless they're at events, and then they connect together. So there's some it is a small industry, but it's still fairly large, I would say. So the story that you have, I mean, that is actually fairly uncommon, I would say.
Yeah, I think that was like a 1 in a million kind of situations.
That's amazing.
Of like,
yeah, no,
you know, like I was just like, oh, my brother has this thing in Australia. I'm like, what's it called? And I'm like, I just had banana beer there. You know, like, yeah, the odds of that happening, I think, were pretty like slim, but nonetheless, like a weird connection in like the business world. And there's always like mingling stuff. I'm trying to think where I've gone on a few of those brewery tours, and I just love them. They always have like great stories. Yeah, in the mix of things with that. Anyways, what is
the brewing industry, no one is from the brewing industry, if that makes sense. Like everyone, this is their second, third, fourth career usually, or they sold a company and they came back to beer. Yeah, I mean, that's just it. Like it's that, I mean, I'm one of few people, I would say, who did the academic side and moved into beer, and started out in beverage alcohol to begin with. Most people, you know, they could come from any industry realistically and then get into beer because they want to, but it is a labor of passion. Like my the brewery owner I worked for second when I was in Seattle, his famous quote was, if you want to make $1 million in the brewing industry, start with 2.
Right.
So you're not going to make, and that's, I think a lot of the downfall is like, I have consulted people in my jobs, and they're like, well, you know, I can just like, if I do this, this, and this, I'm going to make so much money. It's such a lucrative business. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I can't even tell you the name of the brewery. I don't even know if it's going to be around anymore, but I was like, so you just want the cheapest products, huh? And he's like, yeah, anything that's cheap, I want it, you know, and I'll sell it to like these, like Boston Pizza. And I'm like, dude, like, he's like, old hops, I don't even care. And I'm like, oh my God, like, you're not even trying to make a good beer, you're just trying to make alcohol. Like, that was it, you know? Oh, just disgusting. But hope he's doing well.
Sometimes it doesn't hit home until you have like that experience. It's funny you say that, because I've heard that said on a winery tour one time. Where they said that they're like, you know, if you want to get in this business, you got to, you know, whatever. I think they said start off with 5 and have it be wine or whatever. But a lot of people do that out of like labor love. But if they do hit it off with something that's like I mean, I don't know if this is the case for this one. I'm just like eyeing down the 1919 here in this case. Shameless plug for a Little Brown Jug here. And I think actually I know one of the owners are Kevin. Shout out to Kevin, and the rest of the team there. They are great. But like that's kind of a staple like locally here. And you look at like other breweries, and really getting like too in the weeds about like some marketing decisions, but other breweries who are like pretty successful, they still have their downturns too. So it's like, but I guess it's kind of correlated back to probably the farming side of things. I don't know if that's perfect, but it is a cyclical market on its own, and it's got to be related in that way, maybe. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, you're looking at, so exactly that. And that's a side that not a lot of people talk about. And one of the reasons why I'm trying to bridge the gap, I guess, in social media, in on the education side, like a couple of years ago when the barley crops were absolutely atrocious here in Canada, that was 2021.
Yeah, that was when I was still working in egg. They dried up because I was trying to buy like peas and lentils. I was shout out to GFI, and yeah, everything was like toast.
It's awful.
And like half the crop. Yeah.
Well, so basically what happened, and this is just like exactly what you're saying. So the barley crop and every other crop, absolutely atrocious. China was in a trade war with Australia. So China, of course, is growing their livestock industry for meat consumption, as one does. They needed feed. So they took all of the barley that was left from Canada because they wouldn't take it from Australia. And so we didn't have any malting barley left, which actually is a huge industry here in Canada, is malting barley. We have multiple local barley or malting houses. So, and like there is some in the US, like North Dakota is a big one. And there's a few scattered, but I mean, a lot of it does come from Canada. And so what had to happen was we had to get containers from Australia, come to Canada to malt it, or come from Europe to malt it on a different side. So that drove the prices up like crazy. So beer, like breweries, could not necessarily brew at the same price level as they did before unless they had signed contracts specifically for a price that was set before that happened. So that's one way that like agriculture makes a huge impact on beer.
Well, that's definitely, that was the world I was coming from, was signing contracts and stuff, and the price literally doubled in some cases from where guys bought, or we were buying, I don't even know what else we call it, like red lentils. And worked there even like long enough to remember all this stuff. But then like by the time like harvest came around, they were at like $18, and those were already signed. So for us, it's a benefit, but for poor farmer, that's the part of the business that could go either way, right? The price could have gone down, it could have gone, unfortunately, it literally doubled, which is really hard to swallow. I didn't realize that about the Australia thing. Okay, question or statement, I could be wrong on this, but a lot of the malt comes from Alberta, right? Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, Alberta. Not quite a lot in BC. There's a little bit, but an interesting fact about BC is for like the distilleries, there's a program where if you use 100% BC grown materials, you get a huge tax break. So for distilleries in BC, they're incentivized to use malted barley and malted ingredients and other ingredients specifically from BC to get that huge tax break. So a lot of what is grown in BC and malted is taken by the distilleries in British Columbia.
I'm taking literal notes right now. Because I don't know if this exists like locally here in like Manitoba or like somewhere in Saskatchewan, but like that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
If we're talking about like some other stuff with I said it's a fine line of like not going too far in other topics, but like carbon and using emissions and stuff. If you're feeling, if it's a trade war, like stuff's going on or whatever, just because of a dispute, and you're shipping stuff halfway across the world, from Canada to China, and then from Australia back to Canada or Europe to Canada. One of my first gigs in ag when I was in university, between like the Dow years that I did, was working for the Port of Churchill. It was owned by Omnitrax at the time, and we got to decide like where the ships went to like different ports around the world and stuff. Incredibly interesting role, but it's like we were just shipping out. I never really got to see what was coming in because nothing came into that port. It was all export, or mostly anyways. I think there was a little stuff, but it was always not enough storage capacity up there for much more than that. And interesting to like think about it again now, and you're like, oh wow, like even that would make so much more sense to incentivize locally, but there's so many other parts and other people's pocketbooks being worked on that end. So it's like it gets kind of political really quick.
We could get into an entire podcast, and I hope to have, I honestly, I would love, this is the kind of stuff that I am very passionate about because again,
but no
one knows about it, right? So like think about, there is a maltster in, there are now craft maltsters, which is great, but they don't have very much capacity. So you're talking very specialty malts. There's one here on the Saanich Peninsula on the island, but they only do local because there's no point at trying to sell to other places because they don't have that much to begin with. But like there's one in Saskatchewan, Prairie Malt. They almost only do Saskatchewan breweries because there's not that many acres, right? So everyone's contracted
Right.
with Prairie Malt out there. And you've got Great Western Brewing Company, which is one of the largest craft breweries like
Yeah.
in Western Canada. I just had a meeting with them that was in February. Super amazing people. The head brewer, it used to work for Anheuser, I think, no, Labatt, Anheuser-Busch. Anheuser-Busch. And he's killer. But like they're all contracted with Prairie Malt because it comes locally, and they're buying an insane amount of malt. So like there's so many different systems in which and then like Sierra Nevada, like it's taking stuff from British Columbia and Alberta. So we're talking like large corporations coming out of the US who are also taking malt from Canada. So you want to do local, but it's also kind of hard because everything's being sold to larger companies because it is great.
Totally. Yeah. Interesting.
It's a whole ecosystem.
But it's a cool thing to hear, like BC is like at least like attempting to do that, like regardless of like I guess the success of that, because I think one of the reasons, like even when I was at like the Port of Churchill, there was like I don't know, no quote on numbers here, but I think it was like a $9 a ton incentive to use like the port just to have more stuff at the time. Omnitrix, I think, was like new, and to Manitoba owning that section there, and it was like, so we had like more business because of that, but it also didn't make as much sense to use like the other ports just because they were so much larger and stuff. So it helped some business go through there, but you're like, to your point there, like the logistics of moving that stuff around and the spend of these bigger companies probably negates some of the purchases made locally by a smaller brewery because they just don't have the same power to do that. So,
and I mean, some of these bigger companies are more accessible because craft has been so large, but there's all sorts of other dynamics at play. I mean, the Fraser Valley out here and the Okanagan Valley used to have a ton of hops, and they no longer have those hops, but those hops went directly to Labatt during that time. Like it just
why'd they stop?
Because they could get it cheaper elsewhere. Like realistically. And I mean, at that point, I can't remember exactly when, so I don't want to like misquote, but
that's okay. We're not at that level of fact checking yet, but if we do need to be, we will edit it later and correct
it. It didn't make sense for those farmers to be growing hops at that point because the return on investment wasn't as good. So now you see in the Fraser Valley other products, in the Okanagan other products. So yeah, it was an investment in an ROI kind of thing.
I mean, look at back in we still have like remnants of it here in like locally here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, but like the sugar beet factory used to be like huge production, right? Like farmers all had sugar beets. Now there's like none, like none. And
there is one.
Oh, there's one. Sorry.
Not Manitoba. It's in where is it? It's right outside of Grand Forks.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Because it stinks. If you drive, because I used to drive back and forth between essentially Fargo and Winnipeg for like a good year when I was dating my husband, and it was stunk. It stinks. Oh, we froze.
That's okay. We'll edit it out.
Yeah.
We're driving between Fargo and Winnipeg. All right, cut back in.
I'm gonna look it up. Sugar beet.
But like that's a good example too about like how things change. I mean, like we looked at like Yorkton, Saskatchewan right now. They're big on canola crush, but what does that look like in 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Is that still going to be the case, or is it going to adjust? I mean, people up there probably don't want to, think about that a whole lot. They just invested a bunch of money to do it, but
it is right outside of Hillsborough.
Okay.
So just south of Grand Forks by about 20 minutes. The American Crystal Sugar Company. It has a 4.62 on Google Maps, which like why?
the drive by the sugar beet factory is phenomenal.
Unloaded my truck a day early. Very polite and friendly staff. Like, why are you rating?
Anyways. Well, everyone's, hey, we're talking about SEO, before. Like it's
Right.
important and everything. Maybe they're getting more hits. Question for you on the beer
Yes.
though too, like where the one that you're having and in general.
Yeah.
I think back to my favorite beer ever, and I just started kind of getting into like trying other beers. So it's kind of evolved, but I had one that stuck out for me, and it's since shut down. You might even remember this better than I can, but the name of the actual beer, because from my simple learning on this, like there's like a registry or something with like all these names of
Okay.
beer somewhere out there. I don't know like how true that was. Someone told me about that. Like if you register the name of beer, it goes in like a book, and no one else can use that name or something like that. This one was called Life Coach, and I just thought it was hilarious that it was called Winnipeg Brew Co. They used to be downtown, and they whatever, it didn't work out for them. Well, probably the same kind of thing. I think they were trying to do lots of unique stuff, and it's like focus on your one thing. I just said a few times in there, I'm like, you guys should have like 2 4s of life coaches. Like people would buy that, like buy it. Like that's super funny on a Friday. You're like, okay, I'm just gonna go meet my life coach for a bit or whatever. But I really liked it. I remember it being like a blonde, I want to say blonde ale at the time, and it was like great tasting, and I thought it was hilarious. So that was like one of my ones that sticks out. And I mean, they've since like folded, but that was a cool one.
That Non-Such, I believe, is in that building now.
Yes, yeah, it is, and they're good too. They're super great actually. I was eyeing up on that was one of the choices, but who's ever doing marketing here?
Interesting. Those folks are interesting folks.
IPA.
Nice. Yeah, so those guys are brewing out of Torque. Torque does a lot of contract brewing, so people who don't have their own space. Same with Oxus. Oxus does a lot of contract brewing, so Good Neighbor brewed out of Oxus for a long time. That one is one of my favorites. I love Good Neighbor. They are such sweet people. Morgan came from.
Where's that one at?
So that's down.
I feel like I know I've seen it before, but I also don't get out to like every spot in Winnipeg either. But now I'm gonna have to go check it out.
It's near Westminster Ave. It's like in Wolseley. Yeah.
Killer though. That there's is that right beside like the kombucha place there ish?
Could be.
Well, probably close enough because like Winnipeg's not that big, so
yeah,
probably is because it's in Wolseley. Yeah, the walkable area there.
Yeah.
So what would be, because you've got to try a whole bunch of different like breweries. You worked at some, you said in Seattle and stuff. Would you have a favorite beer that sticks out for you without putting, or a top 3 maybe?
Oh my god, that's so hard. I mean, like it could be Winnipeg wise.
Sure, let's do Winnipeg.
Winnipeg. I mean, the thing is that beers change all the time. I have styles that I gravitate towards.
Let's talk about that then. It's just like wine. Like I like a Cab Sav from California. So it'd be something I'd more like go look for, but then it's like I will vary off that. And then with certain like wineries, and it's like you can, you find one you like, and then also you're like, okay, let's go get
if you like
trust this brand.
Right. No, I mean that's just it. Like that's kind of I mean, I love double IPAs, West Coast IPAs. I can't do hazies. That just like upsets my stomach. Hoppy pilsners in general, phenomenal, and dark lagers. So kind of a maltier base to a lager, but still super dry and crisp. Love those too. As far as breweries go, I mean, like, they change brewers, they change ownership. Good Neighbor's always great. Little Brown Jug, always fantastic. Sucrum's, if you haven't met.
I have been there.
Have you met Sucrum himself?
I don't know. I feel like I started going there like ish. And we were like biking a lot, like outside, and then you could sit and have like stuff outside more frequently. Like that seemed like the better option because I think they opened just before the world kind of like shut down or whatever for 5 minutes there, and we'll forget about it. But I don't know if I have. So I'm going to say no because I feel like it sounds like it's someone that's memorable that I should note.
He's fantastic. I love Andrew Sucrum. He's the owner. Just like a jovial human being, makes amazing beers, love experimenting with things. Like I just love like his attitude is just like he wants to have fun. He's such a cool dude. I really like I got the opportunity to hang out with him last time. I haven't been to Winnipeg in like a few years, but they started the Prairie Brewing Awards last year.
Awesome.
It's great. So that was hosted in Winnipeg for the first time. And they won a bunch of awards, and it was just like a huge party. So it's Saskatchewan and Manitoba. and it's an award. It's an award show, but it's super fun. And this year it's in Regina, but I will not be able to attend because there's another conference going on at the same time. But next year I'll be back in Winnipeg, and I'm definitely going to go to it. But Andrew Suckram, unbelievable human being.
Awesome. Okay, but what about back to beer though? If you had to, like, if someone's got like a gun to your head, you had to pick even a top three, like, or pick. So you said, wait, let's work on this together. So there's like double IPAs. You said was like or West Coast. Both of those, you're
West
like,
Coast
okay,
or IPA,
yeah,
double
so
IPAs.
those.
If they're made
Okay.
right, I think that's the point. Like any beer can be if it's made right, and that's the problem. A lot of them aren't. So, trying to think right now. I mean, yeah, like it's hard because a lot of them aren't. Fat Tug. Okay, Fat Tug out here. That's an amazing beer. Driftwood makes that one. It's an old school 7% West Coast IPA, unbelievably tasty. That's across Canada.
Solid.
Yeah, solid beer. Yeah, I mean, they rotate so quickly. I don't know. Staple beers are difficult for me. I basically go with what's tasty.
Yeah, because you'll have kind of like we were saying before, like you'll have new recipes come through often. Yep. Something will be like amazing, but then they might not make it again.
Yep.
Ever.
Exactly.
So that's kind of, my experience with the life coach, although like hopefully that comes back. There was a farmer's kid who I worked with in like selling like seed and chem at the time or whatever, and one of his sons took like brewery school. What was your last name? Last name Weeb. And he worked at Winnipeg Brew Co. And now I'm missing, they were twins. Anyways, he was a great kid, and I always told him, I was like, you guys should make your own brewery, like on farm, because then you're in more control of like producing this stuff. And oddly enough, this wasn't even like, well, not that we even really had a script, we like a couple of questions to kick this thing off. But since I moved in this house here, the original deck that I had, I remember I was like doing some landscaping, and I used to do a landscaping thing, and it was like the first thing that I really wrecked on it, like pulled everything off and redid. And I remember pulling this giant vine off of these bushes, and it ended up being a hop vine. I didn't realize it at the time. Like, yeah. And I tried to kill it because I was like, this is like way overgrown. Like it's huge. Like I just want to get rid of it. And no matter what we did for efforts to kill it, it came back and like thrived. So it like it was all over my backyard last year again. Like in fact, like now I kind of like, I'm like appreciating it more, and it's really fun in the fall because it starts to smell like beer. I'm like sitting out there in like late August, and it's kind of like, I'm like, oh, it's like smells like hops. But it's, I don't know what variety it is, but it's like, it's impressive with how this thing grows. And I don't know who planted it. There's only been a few owners before me, but someone must have placed it there, because I don't think it's like a native species, Manitoba. But it's like, yeah, it's really cool.
I mean, the rye is so hardy, so like you literally have to dig that out. Like,
So and, like, hold on. Let's talk egg for a sec to explain to anyone what you just said. So hops are really hardy because more like the root structure, because I forget kind of like how to like speak this, but you
basically it's like ginger root, for example. So it is, it's a rhizome. It's it is like, it will flower, it will produce, it's as hardy as wheat is. Honestly, they're both Cannabaceae kind of types. So anywhere weed thrives, hops typically thrive as well.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think hops are so interesting because you only use one part.
That's it, because on the grapevine they use multiple parts. Like grappa is made from like the vine or whatever that's like taken down, if I'm correct on that, right? And it's like, then like you squish it, ferment it, and then if that's
I had grappa, and I don't remember anything after having grappa, so I can remember.
I had grappa because I used to work at the LC. They used to have like that Christmas stuff, and I remember I brought it to a party when we were back in like egg days, if that's even like a memory of this one event. And it was like a blank bottle thing, and it was not a, I mean, it was like, I don't think anyone remembered what grappa tasted like after they had grappa. It was quite strong.
I went to a wedding in Italy this summer, and like they only had wine and grappa, and it was like, oh, that's what you're drinking. And never
like, I feel like grappa is just like, I don't know, it feels like the vodka of vineyards, I guess.
It's the
whatever it is.
grape-based pumice brandy.
Yeah, well, that's kind
Yeah,
of the
you're right.
feeling after you have
Grape
it.
seeds, stalks, and stems.
Yeah, so
Why
it's like
would they do that?
it's resourceful. I mean, they're turning it into an alcohol off of another thing that was making alcohol or sugar. I guess ultimately it's like the sugar in it, maybe.
Oh,
Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is, but it's doesn't mean you should, right? Like, I don't know.
It's just
Like
like an
you can
Italian tradition, no big deal, but they really shouldn't.
like you can make anything out of anything realistically, but like, should you is the question
Yeah.
ultimately. Yeah. I was gonna say if you like, have you tried any Washington cabs? If you like Napa cabs,
Um,
or if you like California
I'm gonna write
cabs,
it down now.
no,
Washington cabs.
Yakima Valley, Columbia Valley cabs. Um, as climate change is kind of changing landscapes, that is going to be the next big.
Yeah.
It's good. Like if you like the big Napa cabs, like the meaty, juicy, dry, like that's
Yeah.
Washington, Eastern Washington.
Shout out to Eastern Washington.
It's so good. Yeah, no, it's amazing and cheaper.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
sold. I'll go
I
over
drink a lot
to
of wine too nowadays.
no.
Like I can't drink hard liquor. I used to love whiskey, and I just can't do it anymore. My body's like, "What are you doing?" I'm
That's
like,
funny.
I don't
I'm
know.
almost moving more that way because maybe it was like the opposite thing or whatever, but I had a lot of wine during
Better
COVID.
for you. Like, not that beer is bad for you, but like as far as like
But
calorie count and like what you're trying to achieve, yeah, of course,
yeah,
hard liquor would be easier, but the next day isn't.
not all the time.
Not
Yeah.
all the time. Oof.
Yeah. What is like what's one of your least favorite beers? I mean, this is easier to like stick out. We often I think as a species remember like some of the negatives a little bit better, not to point that out, but like it's hard to choose the favorites because you remember those as like all blended together good times.
Yeah.
But is there any kind of beers that like you really don't like?
I don't love sours, to be honest with you. I've never been like
Yeah.
ooh, I'm just gonna drink a pint of a sour beer. Like that just or like a really heavily fruited beer. Those just they don't do
Yeah.
it for me, you know,
No, that's
like
fair.
yeah. A
I
lot
have
of people
moments
like
with them.
sours, but I don't.
Yeah, no, that's whatever. Everyone's got their own flavor. That's why the breweries make all the mix of everything.
Like,
Hopefully, it include the whole crew there. They got the stouts, sours, IPAs, blondes, whatever else they're doing.
yeah.
Other blends. I mean, like they most of them end up making like a mix. And the one that comes to mind is Kilter locally here in Winnipeg. They got like a mix like
Oh, I
logos
forgot
and stuff.
about
And yeah, that's okay. We'll do a shout out to them too. I mean, it's hard to remember all of them. Hopefully, I didn't miss anyone too much. That wasn't the whole point of the podcast today, but we're doing a bunch of Winnipeg shout outs for breweries. Yeah, I had a couple good sours there. The one called like Juicy.
yeah.
That one sticks out as like being good. But there's some other ones where I'm like, I think of my grandma's house growing up. This is a bunch of shout outs to lineage on my end today. Had a crab apple tree. I remember being like a kid and like dumb and like picking it up and like biting into them, thinking you could eat them, and terrible.
Exactly.
Some of the sours are similar to that. I mean, they're just so bitter. Like it's like tart. It's not, you're not getting the experience that you really want out of it. But yeah, I feel like you can't have lots of them either.
Kilter is
But
great. They do a great job. They have an interesting hop profile, which I appreciate. They're doing something completely different. So Miguel used to work out in British Columbia, and now he runs Kilter. Super awesome dude, has a lot of connections. But he uses Eldorado hops, which is more of a pineapple juicy kind of base. So that's not really typical of brewers. They usually use something that's a little more universal. But yeah, almost all of his hops or almost all of his beers use Eldorado in them. So
what's the difference on the hops on that side of things? Like for
so
how many is this opening a can of worms for like how many kinds of like hops there are? But like
yeah, oh no,
that's
there's hundreds of hops. They're all different. I mean, yeah, we could do a full discussion on that. That's why I try on my Instagram to like post, like this is the beer I'm having, these are the hops, this is the profile, So trying to be better about that because even if you're the most experienced brewer, some people are just coming up with weird and wacky things. So
right. So there's hundreds of varieties of like hops in there. What's with the one that you just said that Kilter uses? And it's from
Eldorado.
BC.
So
Eldorado. Is that a
yeah,
very popular one or like good one?
it is. It is a
Yeah.
more popular one. It's got a lot of hype to it. It has neat Spanish lineage, so that's a whole nother ball game. It's basically it came from a wild growing species out of New Mexico, and it smells and tastes like pineapple.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
We all
Out of
use
all
it.
the things to be in beer or whatever, and this is in like most of the beers, and they like, or
Yeah.
like in a, oh,
Usually it's
huh.
like, okay, think about it as like paprika. So
Okay.
instead of garlic, which a lot of brewers use, like those hops, the garlic hops, if you will, he uses this hop that's typically like paprika is only supposed to be sprinkled on. He uses it as the garlic, if that makes sense.
Does to me. And I also,
Okay.
I mean, you're speaking languages that I also like. I mean, I like garlic and I like pineapple and I like hops. So these are all words that are happy that way in my
Right.
simple mind.
Hops are basically,
So, huh.
the spice of life, the spice of the beer.
Yeah, we could definitely go on for like super long here.
Oh, I
This is awesome. We might even have to like have like an episode 2.0 on this at this point.
right.
There's
Yeah.
like this is open. Like I wrote a bunch of like notes down here, enjoying the beer. And
We can
what's
get some
other
brewers
stuff that
on
you
here. If you want to get some brewers on here, I know some who would be delighted to be on here.
we should do because we can do I forget what the rules are. I'll have to look it up on the back end of this thing, but I have
Yeah.
other options to include like a whole grid of folks. That might be like a really fun thing. I
Cool.
was already thinking about that for everyone I had on episodes already. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, it'd be fun to have like little like group because everyone's doing businesses, everyone's like hustling, doing stuff. But yeah. What one more thing
No,
back to beer though.
I could, if you want that, that's not a problem. Let's get this podcast like
A podcast. There's what's another thing on here? And I'm just reading the label here,
yeah.
and we will definitely do that. But
Shut up
what's other stuff that you're looking at on here? Like I see like
names.
IBU and stuff on the back end. Like what else are people like reading? That's to do with bitterness, right?
Yeah,
Right?
IBUs aren't really, I
Is it
mean, people
important?
still put them on there for the few people who still read that, but honestly, not a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it technically gives you a sense of the bitterness, but honestly, some of the malts also can contribute to that, so but aren't perceived as bitter. Okay, so that is you are drinking classic IPA with a light malt backbone, modern bitterness. Okay, so they're using Mosaic, Galaxy, and Sabro. Sabro is kind of coconutty and is
Oh yeah,
loved
it
or
says Sabro on here.
yeah,
Yeah.
Galaxy and
Wait, sorry, are these the hops then? Is that what you're telling me?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So each one of those has a very different characteristic, and depending on how they're being used, can kind of elicit a different taste. Galaxy used to be is more like oniony garlic dankiness now. It used to be like, and because like again it's plants, it'll change as it develops. It used to be like what was described as blueberry yum yum. So that was what
Okay.
Mosaic.
So is Mosaic the one that is actually used in blueberry beers? Am I picking that wording up right?
No,
Or no?
blueberry beers. I mean, it could be used, but typically blueberry
Doesn't-
beers will be blueberry and
Oh,
like
okay.
a little bit of hops just to call it a beer.
Fair. I was in Florida this winter. I was in I think Sarasota, and there
Mhm.
was this brewery there that had well, number one, it was really cool because it was like a dog bar, outside dog bar, like
Nice.
yeah, turf, small, like there's no food there because dogs would fight over that, but they had
Nice.
drinks and stuff, so you could go get this beer. And this one beer I went and got, they literally had like on top of like like the keg and stuff that they're pouring this into, they sprinkled blueberries in the blueberry beer. I
Oh
was like,
my god,
that's so cool. So I guess they like supply them with blueberries to put on top
that's
of the beer to
fun.
have. I was like, that's so cool.
That's
Like
awesome.
that's yeah, super neat. And I mean, obviously it was a blueberry beer, but then they literally put them like in on top of it. It was like icing on a cake. I was like, this is like the neatest thing.
It's more like a cocktail then, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
fun. Well, the dog bar thing on its own was like a really neat concept, and I loved that idea. But yeah, it was just really fun. You're getting drunk with your dog. But Shan, this has been amazing talking. We're just gonna have to do more. So,
Yeah.
but how do people find you and your expertise? I'm like, give me the Coles notes here, and we'll include it underneath if anyone's looking for that in the future when this is posted. It'll have all those details there. But Shan, tell us how to get a hold of you.
Sure. Yeah. Shan Ferments on Instagram. I do most of my posting. I'm trying TikTok. We'll see. I don't know. I don't love videos personally. I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But Instagram is the best way. And then I have my website. It's exactly the same as my name, shanferments.com. So Either way, I've got a lot of resources on both, and I usually cross-link them. So yeah, if you need to get a hold of me,
Amazing.
I'm both places.
That is wonderful. And so if anyone didn't hear that, it's Shan Ferments on Instagram and Shan Ferments. Is it .com or .ca?
.com.
.com. Okay, perfect. Shanferments.com. And yeah, with all your ferments needs in the beer department here. So thank you so much, Shanleigh and Shan Ferments, for joining us on a podcast. And thank you much, listener, for joining us today. And we'll catch you soon.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.